It's a new day on Deep Space Nine, and the writers have finally remembered that Sisko has a son. He arrives home to find his dad in dress uniform, so something serious is kicking off. We're getting a visit from some new aliens on the other side of the wormhole, a species met by a Vulcan explorer ship, and he wants everything to go well. The first problem raises its head almost immediately. Bashir can't find his dress uniform, and presumably the Cardigan replicators don't have them on file yet. Perhaps plain simple Garak stole it to give him a reason to visit his tailor shop. Sisko's pissed about it, but there's nothing to be done. The delegation arrives, and one introduces himself with a title, so let's assume they're the leader and slap a name of our own on. Alien leader will now be known as... Cup of Noodles, suggested by Lieutenant Oxygen85. Cup of Noodles listens to the first part of Sisko's introduction before getting bored and interrupting. See, he's been told we have games and he wants to play them. Another member of the party whispers in his ear and he demands to be taken to Quark's. Oh dear. Sisko's obviously worried about how this could play out, and Quark tries to ease his mind. Owning an establishment such as his relies on the goodwill of patrons. You could even argue he's the best diplomat on the station, as he has to keep people smiling while also taking their money. He goes to Cup of Noodles and his entourage to see how they're doing. They've been watching Darbo, so Quark offers them a free spin, possibly for diplomacy, but probably to get them gambling. If it was the latter, then it works, but we have a small matter of what to bet. They've brought items from their culture, none of which Quark wants, which is an interesting development after the auction he ran a few episodes ago. Maybe he's worried they'll risk destroying the station again. One thing he is willing to accept, though, is a bag of gems. We'll assume such an experienced merchant as Quark can instantly recognize them as ones that can't be replicated. 6 hours later, and they're still gambling. Sisko's pissed off with waiting around, so goes home, and Quark's starting to feel the same way as the bastards keep winning. He goes over in an effort to convince them it's time to stop, but they're resistant. Instead, he replaces the current croupier with someone who uses a hidden button, the result being a loss for our guests. A look on Cup of Noodles' face suggests he's unconvinced by the sudden change in fortunes. Jake's still up when Sisko gets home despite the time, something that doesn't help Sisko's mood. He's worried about the influence of Eggnog, who's now apparently allowed to be friends with him, perhaps because they're at school together. Jake asks him how the meeting went, possibly to make his dad see that Eggnog isn't what's really bothering him, and Sisko admits it was utter dog shit. Maybe they'll finally be bored of Darbo when he wakes up. Our visitors decided to stay from the looks of things, perhaps because Cup of Noodles wanted to prove they were being cheated. Quark tries to foist blame onto his employee, of course, but Cup of Noodles is no fool. Quark also tries to buy them off with gratuities, but they're not interested in that either. They want to play a game, one of theirs, and one that'll be fair. A box being opened replaces one of Quark's Darbo tables with something new, leaving Quark sufficiently impressed to forget that he's being threatened. Cup of Noodles places 4 items on the structure, which wobbles alarmingly, and tells Quark they're his players. As Quark's trying to learn more about the new game in his establishment, Sisko's in the land of Nod. Bit of a weird dream, though. He wakes in his uniform on a tiled floor, and in a room with doors that have markings, not unlike the ones on the foreheads of our guests. He's not convinced it's a dream, hence him trying to call people and see if it's a hologram too, but neither give results. As there's not much choice, he has a little explore with the tricorder he's carrying and finds a door that opens. The corridor beyond has more doors that won't open, and one that does, to reveal Cup of Noodles. He's no bloody use at all, saying only that they're on level 2, and to move along home before closing the door while laughing. Dickhead. Sisko hears screaming and goes to find it. Bashir's here too, it seems, and yelling his arse off, apparently to try and wake himself. Kira joins them, and so does Dax, just in time for Sisko to announce that this is no dream. Theory time, and Bashir thinks it might be a test of some sort. Maybe that's why we were given comm badges and tricorders. Either way, it looks like nothing's trying to kill them yet, so despite Kira's complaint that she didn't sign up for bullshit Starfleet shenanigans, we split up to find a way out. Sisko's conclusion that they're not in a dream might have some merit. Jake's in Odo's office to report his dad missing. Odo says he'll look into it and sends Jake away, but looking into it might not be so simple. The computer says Sisko's not on the station, but has no log of when he left or how. He quickly learned Sisko isn't the only one. Security guy from the last episode is in ops, which is just as well, as no bugger else in charge is there. Kira didn't turn up for her shift, and neither did Dax or Bashir. Security guy assumed it was due to them getting wankered at the welcome party for Cup of Noodles and his mates, and is a bit embarrassed to find they're all missing. Only his second episode, and he's already lost half of the main cast. Back to Quarks we go, where Cup of Noodles says the board is now ready, raising some very interesting questions over how long it takes to set up. Regardless, it's time to play. Quark's a tad apprehensive about not being told any of the rules, but that's part of the game, says Cup of Noodles. He's given some alien D4 and told to roll. Whatever the score was, it means Chandra or some bollocks, and Cup of Noodles beeps some boops on a console as Quark tries to figure out what the fuck's going on. Back in the not dream, Sisko hears a girl singing. The others join him, and we find ourselves in a room where some of the tiles on the floor have symbols. The girl's singing a nonsense rhyme while skipping between them, and doesn't respond to our questions. Kira's had enough of this shit and tries to reach the door on the far side of the room, only for a force field of some kind to tell her this was not the correct way to play. Bashir gets it half right and follows the girl's movements, only to meet the same problem, so it's Dax that solves things by repeating the nonsense too. They all cross the room and exit, while in Quark's casino, the guests celebrate and Cup of Noodles gives Quark some more gems. He's given a choice, too, that of how to progress in the game. One path is longer but easier, the other shorter but more dangerous, though worth more gems. As he's considering the choice, Odo arrives to ask if he's seen Sisko, Kira, Dax and Bashir since last night. All four are missing, and Quark seems to register the numerical similarity to his players in the game. Odo is just a step behind him when he sees the pieces on the board, though, for reasons I can't quite understand, doesn't just arrest them all and sort it out later. That leaves Quark on his own, and he chooses the safer option, much to the disappointment of spectators. For Quark's players, the safer path seems to involve a party, and one with no small amount of smoke. Kira loses her shit at the partygoers when they respond to her questions with only laughter, and Sisko tells them all to decline the drinks offered to them. That smoke's getting a bit more serious, and our four start coughing. Cup of Noodles turns up to offer Sisko a drink personally, so Bashir grabs one from a passing tray and gives it a try. It's the antidote, of course, and he tells the others to drink too. Cup of Noodles gives them a condescending little clap and points them at level 4, then disappears with everyone else. That means more gems for Quark, though it looks like Odo has decided on a course of action and buggers off. To Ops we go, where Odo's getting security guy to check the ship of our guests. Or trying to anyway, but their tech is very different, so we can't tell if our people are over there. We do see an odd power wibbly though, one that would normally be associated with teleporting, but this is constant. Odo wants to go and poke around, something security guy says we can't do because of Starfleet rules. Odo's not Starfleet though, so tells him to stuff it and teleports over. A little poking around finds a room where they apparently store the light of 1,000 suns. Odo braves it anyway and finds himself back in Quarks. Cup of Noodles gives a look that suggests he knows exactly what just happened and is amused, but Odo's not laughing. He demands the end of the game, something Cup of Noodles says would result in forfeiting the players. Quark tries to call Odo off by saying he's on top of things, though there's some question over whether his motivation is altruism or avarice. He chooses the safer path after some prompting from Odo and rolls the dice again. Based on Cup of Noodles' response, it looks like he just rolled a critical failure. Our players are starting to get the hang of things. Bashir's even treating it as though it's entertaining, as long as you ignore the electrocution and poisoning and shit. He's a touch less excited when some bright wibblies fly down the corridor, examine the party, then choose him to be engulfed and disappear. Critical failure indeed. A piece on the board is removed and knocked over by Cup of Noodles, and Odo demands to know what that means. He's ignored, and Quark is prompted to make his next move. In a change of strategy, he's decided to take the shortcut. Odo thinks it's to win more gems, and that might be true, but his reasoning is sound. The shortcut will get them to the finish line with just a single roll. If each move is danger, and each danger increases, tackling one last challenge with 3 players might give them better odds than if they take longer and potentially lose more people. Odo doesn't seem entirely on board with the idea, but lets him take the lead, including his little rituals. The roll doesn't go quite as well as it could have, and Cup of Noodles tells him it's Thialo. In English, that means he has to sacrifice one player to save the other 2. If he doesn't, it's game over for all of them. That's a bit much even for Quark's gambling appetite, and he begs not to choose, apologising for trying to cheat them earlier. Cup of Noodles takes pity, of a sort, and has the game choose one at random instead. In the game, our remaining players are exploring when they hear the voice of Bashir. Dax is the first to find an open door when they split up and enters what looks like a cave, only for a bit of shaky-shaky to make her fall and hurt her leg. That's because Bashir wasn't Bashir, as Sisko discovers when he tries to call the silhouette pretending to be him over. It's Cup of Noodles once more, and he's still an arsehole, but at least he buggers off again. The shaking's back periodically, and Kira says the whole thing's going to come down. They help Dax along with them deeper into the cave, until they reach a ledge that looks a hell of a lot like the one from Voyager where Sebastian Shitpants got eaten by Shai Hulud. Maybe all alien caves are designed by the same interior decorators. A gap makes Dax tell the others to go on without her as she won't make the jump, so they both tell her to bollocks and instead try to find another way. It's brave and noble and ultimately pointless, as yet more shaky when they're traversing a different ledge makes them all fall to their deaths. Death in the game is somewhat less permanent than reality, it seems. Our players appear alive and well, as long as you ignore the psychological harm, back in Quark's casino. Quark believes he's won and starts to collect gems while mouthing platitudes before he's stopped by Cup of Noodles, who takes back the hall. Cup of Noodles collects his game too and makes to leave, an action with which Sisko takes issue. He's got some choice words for Cup of Noodles, and at least half of them are cunt, but Odo stops him by explaining that Quark has more than a little to do with this. Quark denies everything and says all of those admissions and his begging were just to appease Cup of Noodles, who excuses himself and leaves. Quark's claims of trauma last about as long as it takes him to remember the game might be profitable for him, and will leave him chasing Cup of Noodles for permission to have one until the next adventure. And so we reach our first infamous episode. It doesn't take much searching to find out how people feel about this one, and with mostly fair reason. Nonsense terms and bizarre behaviours abound. The point is to make the viewer not understand what's going on, but that's a very dangerous game to play on a screen. Each barrier you put in the way of audience comprehension risks alienating them to the whole thing, or turning proceedings into a complete farce. If you're going to do that on purpose, you'd better make damn sure what remains is enough to keep people hooked. And that's ultimately Move Along Home's largest failure. It's not interesting enough to get away with being as weird as it is. Nothing hooks us enough to keep us all on board for the ride, and the rest suffers as a result. Perhaps having a more charismatic antagonist who leaned fully into the surreal nature would have helped tie it all together. Someone with John Delancey levels of scenery chewing would have been a better fit for this than Joel Brooks, who, while amply talented, frankly feels more suited to being bad guy of the week for an episode of Magnum P.I. Maybe it's the porn star facial hair and mullet, but he looks like he'd be right at home in a Hawaiian shirt. You could be forgiven then for thinking this was a full-on turkey for me. Well, to my mind, a complete turkey must be either so impenetrable as to actively reject the viewer, so predictable or lacking redeeming features as to bore the viewer, or so lacking in production value as to insult the viewer. I'm not sure Move Along Home truly qualifies on any of these three, but then I'm the guy who found value in Threshold, so I'd be the first to acknowledge that your mileage may vary. That's not to say this was good, because it wasn't, it was shit, but I'm not convinced that's enough to warrant the level of vitriol it receives. There are those who say it's the worst episode of Trek ever made, and as someone who had to watch Voyager's The Fight in a professional capacity, I struggle to agree. That's enough negativity, so let's take a look at the one thing that did interest me, a moment of Quark's behaviour. On the last roll of the dice, Quark is genuinely upset at having to choose who dies, even when he doesn't know to whom it relates. Contrast that with his willingness to organise mercenaries in the previous episode, people who murderized the shit out of multiple innocent crew. It suggests he has an ability to dissociate from indirect consequences of his actions, but not when there's a direct causal link. Without that degree of separation, he just can't do it. Whether you'd call that a variety of morals or just a different flavour of cowardice is another matter, but then maybe those human conclusions don't apply here anyway. Another Ferengi might have picked the least interesting piece and gone back to admiring his gemstones, so Quark not doing this is worth noting. We end this one on an observation, and I'll warn you ahead of time that this one gets a bit silly. Regular viewers will know that I occasionally like to take spurious evidence and run with it, and this one is pretty out there. That board raises some questions. Cup of Noodles puts counters on the second level and says only children start on the first. I have a sneaking suspicion that line was added on set after the actors and director realised the top level would be a proper pain in the arse to use, perhaps a result of the writers and prop department not working closely enough together, or the many well-documented production issues with this episode. That's certainly a conclusion supported by things like this shot here, where the plywood used to make the set is clearly visible, along with the conduit for smoke, cables for lighting, and what looks a lot like gaffer tape. Let's assume for the sake of argument, though, that it's not a fuck-up. Let's assume the first level really is for kids. That would mean Wadi children are all very tall, which presumably also means they shrink as they age given the height of the people we see. Maybe the delegation are actually just teenagers, which might explain their fascination with playing games. And following that logic, it opens up the chance of another conclusion. Viewers of a certain vintage might know another show which used the idea of aging backwards, raising the possibility that 70s sitcom Mork and Mindy starring Robin Williams is actually set in the Star Trek universe. I, for one, love the idea that 400 years ago the Wadi, known then as Orkans, sent one of their own people to Earth, and that's not entirely as far-fetched as it sounds either. Anybody familiar with the traditional Orkan greeting will see it's possible they sent observers to another Star Trek planet, and perhaps influenced their culture too. Maybe the Wadi are far older and far more important than this episode lets on. It's certainly a more entertaining explanation than saying somebody fucked up on a prop. End of episode.
So, this is Deep Space Nine then. It's all a bit severe, isn't it?
That's the Cardigans for you. Starfleet engineers put 90% of their effort into aesthetics. The Cardigans, on the other hand, made the bizarre decision of designing things that work.
Well, that's good to know. It's nice to be somewhere safe, and I'm sure we won't see anywhere near as many technical problems over the course of the next 7 seasons as we did on Voyager.
Well, it's not quite that simple.
Like that lift in engineering, for example. What kind of arsehole makes an open-faced moving platform in an high-traffic area? That's just nonsense. The only way it could have been more silly is if they'd put it in a command area.
Actually, now that you mentioned it.
Or what about putting some of the most important bits of the ship on spindly little connectors? What dickhead thought of that?
Oh dear.
It'll be good to get away from all of that bloody foolishness. Cardigan engineering can only be an improvement. Anyway, what was it you were saying?
You know what, don't worry about it. Better that you see for yourself. Woof.